Welcome to Talking in a Time of Uncertainty. I'm your host, Lucas Dodson, and I'm alongside my guest, assistant coach for the Golden State Warriors, Ron Adams. Ron, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
My pleasure.
And for those that may not know Ron, he's an assistant coach for the Golden State Warriors, as I mentioned, and he has been voted as the top assistant in the league for the past 4 seasons. As for his career prior to the Warriors, it might take a while because he has served many roles at many places. He began his coaching career as an assistant at Fresno Pacific College in 1969 and was head coach there from 1972 to 1975. In 1975, he became the assistant coach at the United States International University. Then from 1976 to 78, he was assistant coach at UC Santa Barbara. In 1979, he spent the year as the head coach for the Belgian professional team. And please excuse me if I butcher the pronunciation, Sunair Ostende. Ron then served as assistant coach at Fresno State from 1980 to 1986 and took over as head coach until he took a job to be the assistant at UNLV in 1990. In 1992, he made the jump to the NBA, where he landed a job as an assistant coach for the San Antonio Spurs. After 2 seasons in San Antonio, he joined the Philadelphia 76ers as an assistant in 1994. From 1996 to 1998, he was a player personnel scout for the Portland Trail Blazers. Then from 98 to 2003, he was an assistant coach for the Milwaukee Bucks. After 5 seasons in Milwaukee, he spent 5 more seasons as an assistant coach for the Chicago Bulls. And in 2008, he joined the Thunder, where he spent 2 seasons before returning to the Bulls before the 2010-2011 season. His second stint with the Bulls lasted until 2013, when he joined the Boston Celtics as an assistant coach for new coach Brad Stevens. Then, in the 2014 offseason, he joined the Golden State Warriors, and the rest is history. So to sum it all up, Ron Adams has been coaching for over 50 years. He has coached at 6 universities. Coach, throughout your long career, I can only imagine that there have been moments where the immediate or the long-term future seemed uncertain. Could you pinpoint one of those moments of uncertainty that maybe defined your career or changed the course of your career? And if so, how did you work through
it? By the way, you retired after going through that whole. Sports are something, especially pro sports. It's basically a win or lose proposition, and so you have to perform. And acknowledging that, knowing the consequences of not doing well, means that you can be without a job. So I don't have any one pivotal moment. I have been fired from jobs, but I don't have any one pivotal moment that changed the trajectory of my career. I think it's, I would have to characterize it as understanding the job itself, understanding the business, and developing a mindset that when things go wrong, you can see through that, continue on, and go to the next thing. So it is traumatic to be out in the street, especially when you have young kids or something, and now you're scrambling for a job. But you can't let the nature of the job, you cannot let the uncertainty overly affect you. It's a matter of having some self-belief and training yourself well so that you can survive. In sports, many people don't, but that's kind of this has kind of been my approach. I don't really have any one watershed event, a job that I was fired from that defined my career. But I would say that I've been very fortunate, because usually when that happened, the next thing I went into was better.
Yeah.
So, I think that's probably how I look at that whole aspect.
Yeah. And those times where you did get fired, did you take those moments to reflect on what could have happened and why you could have been fired? Or did most of those occurrences happen when there was just a lot of turmoil on the team and there was a larger change, like a head coaching change or a general manager change? How did that happen?
Most of those situations were because you don't win enough.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, you when it does happen, it's really a time of reflection. If you're a self-critical person, as I am, you reflect on your own performance. You reflect on what could have gone better, and what you could have done better. You also have to, at the same time, recognize what you did well. It can't be all one way or the other, because nothing is that way. But it's kind of an interesting feeling. You're really, as the old adage goes, it's not too far from the sidewalk to the gutter, right? It's a very short distance. And when you're in that gutter, you examine, and it's a little bit exhilarating, because you have to start again.
Mhm.
And it's easy when I look back on it. It was difficult at that moment, but and also I would add, for the listeners, it helps if you have some sort of long range philosophy, uh, because life is uncertain, and you have to have things that sustain you moving forward. It can be your family. I think that was a big part of it in my case. It can be your belief system that fortifies you and allows you to think long term, to think more broadly. All of these things come into play, and you really examine yourself as a human being when these things happen. No question.
And did that philosophy of family motivating you, was that in the beginning of your career? Did that come into effect in the middle of your career? Or where exactly did that, philosophy, that guiding philosophy come into effect?
Well, that's kind of always been, it's always been there.
Mhm.
Um, you know, you're a provider for your family, especially when you have kids. Uh, your life takes a different orientation in terms of, I mean, look, we all want to do well. We all want to be good at what we do. It's nice when you're recognized for doing something well, but the core part of it is that you're raising up a family, and helping them move forward, and face the future in a good state, let's say.
So you definitely had the uncertain times off the court, but when looking on the court, with the teams that you've coached over the years, there are certainly times where you have been around a lot of uncertainty. I mean, just to name a few, you were with the Thunder in their inaugural season in OKC after the turbulent season where they left Seattle. The Bulls when Derrick Rose suffered his career-altering ACL tear.
Mhm.
Celtics as they transitioned away from the Big Four era. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the season after they traded Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, right?
Uh,
The 2013
yeah, I
14.
was pretty close to it. Yeah, it's a
And
pretty bare bones roster. Yeah.
then recently with the Warriors, you experienced the up and down season in 2016, which ended in the 2016 finals, and KD's turbulent last season in the Bay. So, as a
Mhm.
coach, how do you manage players through uncertainty and keep them focused on winning games? And has your philosophy on how you keep them focused changed over time? And how does it really differ, like situation to situation?
Well, as you said, in your last statement, every situation is different, and you weather the storm with players simply by developing the best rapport you can, on an individual basis, but more than that, just a collective basis. Your environment, the team environment, and so on, hopefully uh, pulls people together. But your own personal interaction with people. If you work in player development and you're working with someone on a daily basis, for example, it gives you a great chance to really lock in. And the skill part is important, but also the human part, just kind of directing, guiding, talking, listening, with an underscore on listening, is really important. And so what that allows you to do when you get in these chaotic situations. Now, remember, basketball is really a chaotic sport. It's free flowing, it's spontaneous, and so on. And so, as a coach, what you're trying to do is you're trying to uh, organize this, for lack of a better word, chaos, this free flow, uh, into some sort of teamwork, right? You're trying to put this equation together that doesn't squash the individual or the team essence of working together, but You're just trying to bring a little bit more sense to it. And then you have the chaos of the game once you're in the game. And games are chaotic. A lot of things happen, a lot of emotions on the part of players, coaches, and so you have to be skilled in handling those kinds of things. And you have to understand that this is just raw and immediate. And some conflicts don't mean anything because it's just the nature of this chaos that you're in. But you're trying to bring order. You're trying to settle an individual, a team, or you're trying to encourage. If things are going well in the game, you just basically try to keep the momentum flowing. But there's no big secrets, I think. But there is at the core the relationship aspect of building this rapport with players, understanding them understanding you, the players understanding what the team is about, what the team is trying to get done. But in these moments of chaos in a game, for example, they're the best moments because you pull together, sometimes against really the situation can be really, really tough, and you get through it and you win, and there's nothing greater than that.
Yeah.
And so, it's a wonderful experience, but there's a lot of things that go into the success of that particular moment. And that's basically all people building kinds of things.
That's awesome. And throughout that time and I mentioned a few of those moments of uncertainty on the court, and you said the relationships, that's the important part. And, kind of like keeping the chaos and like using it in a good way, because that's basketball. I mean, that's the beauty of basketball. But, KD's last season in the Bay, just to bring it back to that, people have speculated and reported about the chaos that happened on the court and in the locker room and in the media. And the relation, I read The Victory Machine. I don't know if you've heard that book that Ethan Sherwood-Strauss released at The Athletic, and go into detail about what happened. So that's pretty much all the knowledge I have of the situation. But read that it seemed like the relationships with Kevin really frayed in the last year, and that contributed to a lot of the chaos. Is that true that the relationships with Kevin contributed to the chaos in the locker room, or were things still strong, and were you able to control that more than the media portrays it?
Well, I haven't read Ethan's book, but I'm sure it has a lot of tidbits in it. I think it was a different season than we had during the 5 seasons that we made it to the NBA Finals, and Kevin was a little bit different. It was his contract year. I think he was struggling with what he should do, and we had other things that didn't help us. Draymond's incident with Kevin in LA didn't help our team at all. But you have to understand that there's no team out there in pro sports that is humming along seamlessly. And of course, we got a lot of publicity because we're champions. And, Kevin, I think, in my mind, is one of the 2 best players in the world. So, you're going to get all of this scrutiny. But what was kind of funny about the whole thing, and including Draymond's actions, was like people expected him to say what he was going to do at the end of the year. No one does that.
No
one does that. That's and in every press conference he's asked, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Blah, 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 blah. And that gets old, but that's not the point that I'm making here. And that he had all of this, stress on him, and there was really no way of getting out from under it.
No.
And I judge our season by what the team did. I mean, I think we had a fantastic season. We had injuries, and I firmly believe if Kevin were healthy and against Toronto, we win the series in 6 games.
Yeah.
But he wasn't, and so in pro sports, you can have a lot of turmoil behind the scenes. You can have a lot of uncertainty, and this is kind of our topic, this uncertainty thing. But if you have good pros, and when the ball's thrown up on any given night, they're going to play well together. They're going to try to do their job. And, that's what that team did that year. Again, I'm not saying it was seamless, but there are a few seamless few seamless teams, and I would say championship caliber teams. As you also, I'll add one thing. As you saw in Chicago series, the Chicago TV series, Last Dance. I was trying to think of the name of it again. Chicago always had turmoil, great turmoil, and I would have to say that every great team has that, and the longer you're together, it can be more pronounced year to year. So the proof of the pudding is always in the tasting, and that season was pretty good. And if it weren't for injuries, I firmly believe we would have won our 4th world championship.
And I still say to people like my friends and my family, I always say that if Clay didn't go down Game 6, I think that game is won, and I'd like the chances going into Toronto in Game 7 too. Because I mean, it was a 6-point lead, right, when Clay got hurt in Game 6, and that just sucked the air out of the building. And still, if Steph had hit that shot at the end of the game, going to Toronto for Game 7. But
it was I think you're completely accurate on that game. We felt really good about that game.
Yeah.
Until Clay went down, and we felt that a Game 7, even though we were beat up a little bit, a Game 7 in Toronto put all the pressure on them. That was our kind of game. That's, we had been through that so much in the prior 4 years, and we felt we would have had an advantage. But the other big factor is Kevon being injured, and he played so courageously during that time period. But that really, really hurt us. I know a lot of people look at Kevon, and he's not this all-star player or whatever, but for us, he's tremendously important, tremendous glue for our team.
And he's a fantastic value for a 30th overall pick to get that player who can fill in at the 5 and do all the dirty work. I mean, from TV, he looks a great screen setter, good passer, a good rebounder, can play versatile defense, very impressive player. And, looking at like the 4 seasons before the 2018-19 season, there were definitely moments of turmoil I can imagine because, as you said, no season is perfect and no team has seamless success. But would it be fair to say that the chaos or disorder in the 2018-19 season was just amplified because of the brand of Warriors basketball and the brand of joy and selflessness and utter fun that it seemed like the Warriors had in the 2014-15 and 15-16 season?
Well, I think you're talking about our culture. I think Steve built a tremendous culture, along with Bob Myers, our general manager or CEO, whatever his title is, but he's the big boss. And we built a wonderful culture, and Steve did a magnificent job of this. And I think, quite frankly, our culture survived pretty well. Even through season 5. And I think it was really reflected in season 6, last season, or I should say this season, still ongoing, but because we had a much lesser team, we had really some hurdles to get over with this team, but really positive people in the program, our players worked hard every day, good attitudes, played with good joy. And so I think our culture survived it all. The 5th year was a little shaky. The wheel, a wheel or two was loose, but through that, I still think our culture emerged and allowed us to play at the level that we played. Um, every year's not going to be perfect. Not to say that any of the other years were perfect. There were, you have your ups and downs and your problems, but that's what sport, I will say, and we get into this a little bit later, I think, but sport is uncertain, much like life is. And so the question is, how do you work through uncertainty, and how do you face it when things go sideways?
Yeah.
And again, there are ways of doing that, but you just have to trust. You have to trust your system. You have to trust your players. The coaches have to be trusted, and you continue on. And it's not pretty always, but that's the formula.
And yeah, you said the culture like stayed strong in this sixth season, the Warriors, and getting through the uncertainty and prevailing, as you said. Would you attribute this a lot to, I don't want to say the pressure being completely off, because at least at the beginning of the season, there seemed to be a lot of pressure on people like Steph and Draymond to keep the ship afloat. But as soon as Steph went down, at least from a fan's perspective, it seemed that there was no pressure to win games. More so, it was development and grooming the younger guys to potentially be role players for a much stronger team next year. And overall, just having fun in games. Because from my experience this year, this was some of the most fun I've had watching Warriors basketball in a while. And my parents might not agree with me on, but I'm saying is every win this year felt like a triumph. Every win felt like a playoff win because of the uncertainty and because of how unexpected it was and how much joy it seemed like each player had and the coaching staff had during a win. Like I remember Steph's first game back, even though that was a loss to Toronto, the energy inside of Chase Center just felt like something that was gone for so long. So having that back, made things exciting. And I can imagine that really helps you get through a tough season, are those moments of joy and those moments of, like pure triumph in which otherwise would be a meaningless regular season game.
Yeah, I would agree with much of what you said. I would say this, though, going into this season, we knew it was going to be a very different season. And even if Steph would have stayed healthy, it was still going to be a challenging season. There's no question about that. Mm. And we had lost too much, and we had, basically a whole lot of new people, and we were going to rely on people who really had little experience. I mean, and trying to work them in and so on, rookies and so on. But yeah, I think you said it best. It was a good testimony to the culture. And, it was, if I'm a young player playing on that team too, I'm excited because I get to play.
Yeah.
And I get to show what I can do. Ordinarily on a more veteran team, I would not play because I would wait my turn, so to speak. So.
And did some of those young players that got to play this year, did they show and prove to you and Steve and the rest of the coaching staff that next year when people are healthy, that they can be solid rotational players?
Well, that's the hope, but context is important also.
Yeah.
And the context is people this year played who ordinarily wouldn't have, and they were allowed to show what they could do. So you take that, given the context of this season, okay, and then see how it works in the future. Because as you add players, we're going to get back to playing how we used to. Mm-hmm. And that is a much more fluid offensive game up and down the floor. And, led by Steph and Clay. And so this is an indication of what some of our younger guys can do, and I was proud of them. But It's just the first step.
Yeah.
And you see how that integrates into the next season.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely young players to watch. Like Pascal was a great success or surprise even for this season. I like what Jordan Poole was doing towards the end of the year. Started to come on a little bit stronger. But the one thing that I wonder about the future of the Warriors is I know there's been, I mean, it's been ever since you came, really was, and because that's your role, is defense. You know, you seem to be the defensive guru on that staff. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this year you relinquished your like defensive coordinator duties.
Jerry Collins basically took my spot. So he did a nice job. He's a good man, good coach.
Yep. And how do you think that defense has defined the Warriors? Because too often I see in the media when the Warriors are talked about, it's the Splash Brothers and the quick offense, fluid offense, and people seem to ignore the defense a little bit too much because that's seemed to be a pride point for the Warriors for a lot of years. Could you speak a little bit on that part of the Warriors' identity and how it's shaped it?
Well, offense always gets more of the hype and the scrutiny, but we've been a really good defensive team, or we were a very good defensive team during those 5 years, and a lot of it was because we had some good two-way players, people who could play offense and defense. And I think our system of defense worked for us. We did a lot of switching. We had good uniform size. And we were kind of, not that people hadn't switched before in the league, but we were kind of set the bar on that particular way of playing defense, and how many teams do that. And we had, great success, and success breeds confidence in the systems that you're teaching. So we came in, we started rolling pretty well early on. People believed, and we continued to build our system, especially our defensive system. And so defense is very important to the program now, and it's very important to Steve. I think when Steve started off just trying to, there were so many things coming at him, but he was more of an offensive coach, but he really enjoys defense now and puts great emphasis on it. And I think that has been probably the thing that has gotten us over the top, especially in playoffs. We've had great defensive efforts and stats in the playoffs. So that was hugely important to us winning.
Yeah. And you mentioned how, the winning also came from that, the switching identity and having those versatile defenders who can guard 1 through 5. And that really changed the league, as you said. And another thing changing the league right now is the coronavirus. So certainly the return of the NBA and the future of the NBA is clouded with so much uncertainty because of it. How would you like to see the remainder of the season played out, if it is even played out? And what direction do you think the league's future is headed in regards to scheduling?
Well, it appears that the league will have some sort of season-ending finale in Orlando, Florida. I think that's probably what's going to happen, and it will be more of a playoff format, I would think. I'm not privy to that, so I have no information that's that's final. I think putting some closure on the season will be good, but let's face it, it's like with everything else in our culture, the virus will tell us what we can or cannot do. And I tend to listen to the people who know what they're talking about in that regard. And this is a very dangerous time period. It's the most, it's probably in my lifetime, I'm 72 years old, and it's probably the most lethal thing I've seen or experienced. There have been other time periods that were dicey, the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things like this, but this is really a threat. And we have not done, as a government, a great job of getting out in front of it. Yet we want to open our culture and, return to a quote unquote new normal. It's very hard to do. So sports, sports are just a business and will be affected in the way any other business is affected until we get out in front of this virus. Um, Hopefully next season will be fluid and we can have a next season, but I would doubt it's with fans.
Yeah.
So, there's just so many unknowns. We can plan, everyone has to plan and all that sort of thing, but there's one determining factor, and that is that virus and how we handle it as a nation.
Yeah, and I mean, finding a vaccine too, that was the large step, I guess, towards returning to some sort of new normal, as you mentioned. But yeah, it's really up in there.
Well, they've done these studies, and it's one thing to say we're going to open everything. It's another thing to say that people will actually partake. And they've done it. They did a study several weeks ago, and 72% of all NBA fans said they would not attend a game unless there was a vaccine or a prophylactic treatment. And that's a pretty good number of people.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at right now. So it's not pretty, but in times of catastrophe or times of trial, I should say, maybe not catastrophe, you have to have patience and be cautious in your moves.
Mm-hmm. And with the proposals, there are no like concrete proposals for the future of the league, but just some ideas I've heard thrown around are that if the season this year starts in mid to late July and eventually ends around October, then next season I've heard that it can either start in January and play out a full season and completely just change like when the season starts and stops, or it's a shortened season that ends in June and then go back to the normal, like August, September training camp, October, and then end in June with the finals. Is there one that you would prefer over the other, or?
I personally have no preference. I think my only preference is whatever is done, that hopefully the season can be completed.
Yeah.
So there's talk about starting later, and that would be the season starts at Christmas time or something. And you play a shorter season. Mm-hmm. Because look, the idea is to get through the season. And depending on what happens in the winter with the virus, there's predictions that if we're not careful, it can flare up again. And you have to understand that each city that a team plays in, they have their rules and regulations too. San Francisco is, and I admire London Breed. I think she really got out in front of this. But San Francisco's going to have is going to be at the top of the list when it comes to monitoring what's going on with the pro sports teams. So you hope for the best on that. And as your theme today suggests, it's uncertain.
Yeah.
And you simply have to make the best decisions possible and move forward in the best possible way, knowing that, there is uncertainty.
Yep. And back to uncertainty, in moments of uncertainty, I mean, when you were fired or in between jobs, was there ever a piece of advice that someone has given you that still sticks with you today, or that you have passed on to people like your children?
There's so many lessons learned during that time period, but I think it's just to use an old adage, you got to keep the faith. In pro sports, for example, you can't get involved in getting too high when things are going well. You can't let yourself get involved emotionally when things are going poorly and getting too low. There has to be kind of an even keel that you operate on. And I think, if anything, that's the lesson that, look, we're not guaranteed anything, any of us, right? We're human beings. As the Buddhists say, life is impermanent. And so if we understand that life is impermanent, we know that the ground we stand on can shift. So the question is, what are your values that can see you through this? But more than that, what's your worldview? How does your worldview enable you to be more stable if the ground is shifting? And so that's really a mental, spiritual kind of thing. And for someone your age to understand that, and this does not preclude the fact that you're not going to be very successful or anything like that. But what it does indicate is that you better, if possible, and as early as possible, wake up to the fact that there are no guarantees for any of us. And this impermanence is with us.
And to transition that to the class of 2020, the class of 2020 faces such an uncertain future. And whether it's graduating college, graduating grad school, or high school, there's certain parts of our life that, seem to be guaranteed, such as you're going to have a job somewhere, you're going to be taking that next step after college, or the matriculation into college. That all has been affected. So what advice would you give to the class of 2020? And how would you actually parallel what you just said to the younger generation that's taking the next step?
Well, what I just said, I would apply to your last question. I got a little ahead of your last question. But look, the young generation, you guys are so talented. You guys and gals are just so talented. You're trained up in a different way than I was. And I was looking back, in fact, I looked it up this morning, how many people were in the United States when I was your age. And there were basically 200 million people. There are another 123 million people in the US now. When I was young, I thought we had many, many avenues that were freer, fewer people, the ability to switch too, like start something and say, I want to go to law school, or I want to do this. There was flexibility, I think, in the job market, maneuverability, and it's so much tougher now. And so we see currently in our political actions to the virus, let's say, recently to the event in Minnesota, how a lot of things are becoming apparent. That if we don't take actions, there are consequences. And for example, with this killing in Minnesota, I mean, I grew up in the '60s. The '60s were violent. There were groups that were trying to just become, like everyone else, normal citizens with certain rights and certain privileges and so on. And so this is just an ongoing thing. It's just a cycle. And I think we've taken a step back in terms of race relations the last 4 years, quite frankly. But I'm bringing these things up because these are issues that your generation can change. And in the process, these are just two, two aspects I brought up, but we need to get better as a culture. We need to grow where the old normal is not going to work. And you guys are and gals are the new normal. All right. And there is great uncertainty. This virus has thrown everything, topsy-turvy. I have two kids and I see how it's affected them in the job market and so on. It's a terrible thing, but you got to work through it. And you've got to use your wits, and you've got to use your heart, and you've got to think in terms of making things better. Making things better. And when you have goals, even though things are uncertain, if you have a personal goal, if you have a collective goal, and we've had many great movements recently in which there has been a collective kind of spirit. Some of them peter out, but nonetheless, there was a collective spirit. And that's what has to happen, because when you're involved in that kind of thinking, uncertainty becomes a challenge. Now, there's a lot of fear and trepidation that should be on the part of any young person, just looking at the world and looking at the job market and looking at a lot of other things. But you have to have the confidence, you have to have the faith that it will work out. Maybe not as it did in the past for others your age, but it will work out. And maybe that's pie in the sky. I don't know, but it's challenging. It's a challenging time period for young people, but I think everyone's ready for the challenge. I mean, you're educated, people have gotten great education. They have the internet, which is good and bad, but they have it. The possibilities are before you. And you just have to have the faith and the work ethic and the gumption and the grit and all that sort of thing, that things will happen.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, a matter of keeping our head up too, because as you said, it will work out. I'm a believer in that too, that if we just stay strong, believe, and really make the best out of a time like this, then we can come out strong on the other side. So a matter of what you do with the time and what you do to come out stronger on the other side. So yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, Ron, I thank you very much for your time, for your insight, and for your stories. And yeah, thank you for coming on the show.